You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions Special Episode 5. And now, here are Craig and Jeff.
Hello and welcome to our 5th supplemental log episode of the Tricorder Transmissions. This will be the first half of our Season 1 wrap-up episodes. As always, we are your hosts, Jeff Hewlett.
And Craig Cohen.
And with us today is another returning guest we're happy to have back with us on the show, friend of the show, and Star Trek aficionado, Chris Ritzer. How's it going, Chris?
Hey, what's up?
Glad to have you back on the show, man. Thanks for coming back on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
No problem.
Yeah, it's funny. We, the last couple of episodes, there have been moments where we were like, man, if Chris was here, he could tell us the answer to this question.
Yeah, they definitely were, because, there were a few moments where we got kind of tripped up on things, and we were thinking, like, maybe we should just kind of pitch some of these things to Chris and kind of edit them in when we need them. Like Chris Ritzer sound bites. So, just to kick off this episode, Craig and I thought it'd be a really good idea to answer one of the biggest questions that we get from our listeners. And it's something that we talk about in our episode 0, but that was, 6 months ago that's been put out. So people want to know, what are our criteria for making an episode essential? I think that's a pretty legit question. What do you think, Craig?
Oh, yeah, I think definitely. Essential only means what it does when it has a definition behind it.
Exactly. So in your opinion, I know that we have a lot of similar reasons for making episodes essential, but I know we have a couple of differences in the way we look at things too. So you want to kick us off and let us know what you think makes an episode essential?
Yeah. For me, it's basically, I think, 4 things. The first one being, does the episode introduce an idea or an alien race or a technology that will be referenced throughout Star Trek history? After that, I'll look at character moments. Are there moments here that sort of define a character? Does Kirk do something that can give somebody an indication of who he is as a character? After that, I'll look at the entertainment value of it. Is it an entertaining episode to watch? Certain episodes, I think, are too good to deem unessential if they don't have those other things. I mean, if it's a really, really classic, entertaining episode, I might err towards calling that essential. And that kind of dovetails into my number 4 reason, which I've sort of dubbed the cocktail party reason. And that's basically where, imagine you're at a reception of some kind and the conversation turns towards Star Trek.
Happens all the time.
Yeah. In my opinion, there are certain episodes that even casual Trek fans know. The Trouble with Tribbles, for example. We haven't covered that yet on this episode, but I would consider that a cocktail party episode. So those are really the 4 things that I look at when I determine if an episode is essential.
Very cool. Very, very good explanation. I think we share most of those, especially number 1, which is, I call there's the memorable villain or alien species, new technologies, sometimes new special powers for Mr. Spock can help out. The first time we see a nerve pinch, or the first time we see a mind meld, and the first time we saw a mind meld with a non-humanoid creature, as in the Horda. So those kind of things. For me, the cocktail party one doesn't really come into play for me, although I think the entertaining episode can come into play if it's a really special episode and it doesn't necessarily fit the other criteria of the character building moments or the special alien introductions or special powers by Spock, things like that. So we do have a slight difference, but for the most part, we're essentially the same. So I echo just about all of Craig's comments. And just for fun, Chris, what do you think? Do you have anything that you differ from us on?
For the most part, I agree. Character building, that's definitely important. New alien species coming in. But also, I think it has to be a really fun episode. And I think most Star Trek episodes are like that for the most part, but some just hit you over the head with tons and tons of fun. And those are some of the best ones, I think, to watch and you really can't miss.
Definitely cool. So hopefully that clears up that question for some of our listeners out there, because I know I can say I've had this asked to me at least, 5 or 6 times within the recent last couple of months. So hopefully that puts that issue to bed. And after this season 1 wrap-up episode is all put together, I'm going to go ahead and update the website with a written version of that so people have a point of reference on our own website, the tricordertransmissions.com, that they can kind of look back to and read about if they have any more questions about that. So, on to our Season 1 wrap-up. So, just to let everybody out there know who's listening to the show, the point of this episode is it's going to be a 2-parter. We're going to revisit all of the episodes we've covered so far in Season 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you a quick synopsis of that episode, and Craig and I are going to talk a little bit about whether we thought it was essential or not and the reasons why, and maybe have a little bit of discussion along the way. And Chris is going to be here to add some color commentary and maybe talk about whether or not he agrees or disagrees with us about these episodes and how we voted on them. So before we jump into the Man Trap, which was the first episode that we covered in the running order, by the way, once again, we talk about the episodes in their air date order, not in their production order. And we'll get a little bit more into the differences as we talk through these episodes. So before we jump into the Man Trap, I thought it would be kind of cool if we could kind of just give our overall reflections on our impressions of the first season. And we also have a very special sound bite here coming up that we're going to play for you guys from another past guest, Mr. Jeff Ferry, who joined us for the Arena extended discussion, kind of recapping his overall opinion of Season 1. So we're going to talk to Chris first about his opinion of Season 1. So go ahead, Chris, tell us what you think about the entirety of Season 1.
The entire Season 1, it's a very solid season. And I think out of all the Star Trek series, it probably has the most solid first season. From start to finish, it's very good. Very few episodes that are downers. It's a lot of fun. And it's a great introduction to all the characters and the themes that'll play throughout not just the original series, but all the series that followed.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, Craig Cohen, what do you think?
Yeah, a lot of what Chris said, I'm on board with. I think the main thing you need to really look past in Season 1 is it was a show that was sort of still discovering what it was. Mm-hmm. And you really need to look beyond the constant crew member changes.
Yeah.
And really just focus on the core, trio even. Kirk, Spock, McCoy. And if you really do look at those 29 episodes overall, you really sort of see the relationship that those 3 characters have. And you also got some really, really definitive episodes. Like you mentioned Jeff Ferry was on our Arena episode. Arena is one of those cocktail party episodes. And you've got The City on the Edge of Forever, which a lot of people consider the greatest Star Trek episode ever made. Mm-hmm. And you've got episodes like Shore Leave. So I think overall, if you were really weighing it, you can sort of forgive a lot of Season 1's problems on the fact that it was sort of just learning how to walk after crawling.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree with all the sentiments that the two of you guys put forward here. And it's been really cool to go back and watch all of Season 1 with Craig and kind of talk through all of these episodes. It's been a heck of a lot of fun. And it's been really interesting to see all of these characters kind of growing into what we know of them now, looking back. And, I remember on our earlier episodes, we were talking about how the characters were only partially baked. So Spock is doing some not really Spock things. And, McCoy is saying things that, you're like, wait a minute, that's a little bit weird. So we're seeing the characters grow, we're seeing the writers grow, we're seeing the introduction of a lot of what will become series staples, things like Dr. McCoy's "I'm a doctor, not a blank." These little tiny nuances, the humorous endings to a lot of episodes where they kind of do that character-based humor and play around a little bit and kind of give you a little smile at the end. You start to see all of these little bits and pieces kind of coming together, and moving forward into season 2, they all kind of carry over. So it's really cool to see what a solid first season it was. And looking back at our voting that we did, there really are only a small handful of episodes that wound up being non-essential. So, I mean, just kind of doing a quick count, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 episodes that were non-essential, but out of those 8, only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that we actually agree were non-essential. So that's pretty good. I mean, 5 out of 29 episodes are non-essential, and even fewer of those, maybe 2 of those, were quote-unquote not good episodes. So that's a pretty good track record for a season 1 of any series.
That's excellent.
Yeah, I mean, if I was really doing the desert island thing,
yeah,
and I could only fit so many episodes, I would only remove probably 2 episodes from this season.
I bet I can guess which 2 those are. You want me to try?
Yes.
I'm going to say Miri and the alternative
ding.
factor.
Exactly.
Yes. Yes, I completely agree. And they're even the ones that we said were double non-essentials, like the Squire of Gothos and Court Martial and This Side of Paradise, even those are fun to watch. You know, they're not quote-unquote really bad, but, you know, they're just not necessarily fitting into the pantheon. And we're going to talk about those again a little bit in the future of this episode. But before we move on to the Man Trap, I said we were going to play a little clip from Jeff Ferry. So let's go ahead and hear what Jeff Ferry has to say about the first season of Star Trek, the original series.
Overall, for the first season, if you, I would say, with the exception of like the first 5 to 7 episodes where they're kind of trying to find their footing, like it's pretty well defined after once you hit the menagerie, they're, well, not those, but because those were filmed before, but around that time, they're really in step by then. That's the crew by that point. I like any time where the minor characters got used or the lesser characters. Anytime Sulu gets to do something, anytime when Scotty's in charge, anytime they break away from everything being Kirk and Spock, I really enjoy. Or when McCoy gets his moments and actually gets to pull one of the ladies for once away from Kirk. Anytime they use anything outside, they finally let Uhura go down on an away mission. It took 22 episodes or so, but they let her go. I like when they use the entire cast, which they didn't always do. A lot of times it became the Kirk and Spock show, which I enjoy, but I like to see Scotty and Sulu get out there and and Chekhov once he finally shows up.
All right. So pretty great comments there from Jeff Ferry. Thanks to Jeff once again for recording a little bit with us. And we have a couple more snippets of him that we're going to play throughout the episode when we reach those particular episodes that he had some opinions on. So let's jump in to episode 1. Let's take us all the way back to our first commentary we did, back in, was it August, Craig, of 2013? Been a long time.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that we're here. I'm excited to be talking about these episodes again. So, the first episode of the first season that was broadcast was The Man Trap. So, Craig, you want to take us through a little bit of what that episode was about?
Yes, I actually have the write-up from TV Guide, September 8th, 1966. This science fiction series centers on the crew of the USS United Spaceship Enterprise as they travel on an extended space patrol. Tonight, the Enterprise stops on planet M113 for the annual medical checkup of archaeologist Bob and Nancy Crater. But Nancy doesn't seem to be herself.
Oh, man. There was some really great write-ups. So,
yeah.
We both went essential on this. And the reasons why I decided that this was an essential episode were that the salt monster, or salt vampire, as sometimes it's referred to, is a pretty iconic beast in Star Trek. And although we don't see it alive again, we do see it repeat there's a statue of it in the Squire of Gothos, and it also had a place in Star Trek The Experience in the museum. Craig and I have some pictures of ourselves with it. It's a pretty well-known monster. And it also provides you with some backstory on Dr. McCoy, as we find out that Nancy Crater, who is actually the Salt Monster, when she was Nancy Crater, was one of Dr. McCoy's loves, or maybe his one true lost love of his life. Craig, what were your essential reasons?
Pretty much all in line with what you detailed. You have an iconic monster, and you've got the early stages of seeing how these characters are defined. So for me, I mean, if you're looking at the early episodes, this is one that really sort of lays out a lot of what you're probably going to need to know moving forward. And it's probably a good episode to start with. And I can ultimately see why NBC decided to run this episode first.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, I think you may disagree with us a little on this.
Yes, I do like this episode. I think the Salt Monster is really cool. But whenever I watch Star Trek, I was watching the production order. So this falls as the fifth episode. So because of that, I don't deem it quite as essential. I mean, it's really good. I like it. But I definitely prefer to start with Where No Man Has Gone Before. And I think that just sets up the characters a bit better. I think maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe too much McCoy in the first episode. I don't know. It's just, for me, it just doesn't jive as well as an introductory episode. Though I really like it, it's good, but I wouldn't deem it essential.
Wow, interesting that we have a disagreement there. But I think your reasons are pretty valid, and this maybe lends itself to a greater conversation of, do the episodes make more sense in production order, or do they make more sense in air date order? So as we are watching this in air date order, which is the order that it's been put out on the Blu-ray set and the order that it's presented on Netflix and streaming services, for the convenience of the people who are listening to these episodes, we decided on that order. But, maybe this begs the question of, should we go back and talk about an order of episodes and an essential order of episodes if watched in production order, or should we go back? I think Craig and I have talked about going back and kind of choosing a preferred running order of how we would want to watch them, which could be a whole nother discussion. What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, look at everything, including star dates.
Yeah.
And really, if we're determining what's essential, it's probably within our right to determine or, set out how you should watch our essential run.
Yeah, maybe that's something that we can do once we get through all three of the seasons. Maybe we can kind of take a couple of episodes and kind of talk through what we think would be the optimal watching order. Mm-hmm. Pretty cool. So the next episode that we talked about was an episode called Charlie X. It was the second episode that was broadcast. And in this episode, the Enterprise takes 17-year-old Charles Evans aboard for transport after he spent 14 years alone on a deserted planet. But he's unable to reintegrate with his fellow humans. So he's a little godlike kid and causes all kinds of havoc aboard the Enterprise. Craig, I think you called this one essential.
Yeah, and thinking back on it now, and it was a split vote anyway, so we determined that the split goes to the non-essential voter.
Yeah, we have to double essential vote for an episode to be considered essential.
Yeah, so this one's on the floor anyway, and I won't really put up too much of a fight for this one, but the real main thing that I looked at for this episode from an essential standpoint was really a lot of the Kirk stuff you have going on. You have him in this sort of stern fatherly role with Charlie. And I think it really contrasts his style as a captain as well. I thought there was a cool sort of duality there where you were seeing how he functioned as a captain and how some of that carried over into how he'd possibly raise or be as a father. So I thought those character moments were worth retaining and really helped make it an essential watch for me.
Yeah, and I disagreed mostly because that Charlie didn't amount to much of a villain in the overall Star Trek universe. You never saw him again. He was there, then he's gone. No future appearances. And I thought that the character developments that did happen in the episode were not anything that you wouldn't find elsewhere. So I kind of fell towards the non-essential side. So we did have a split vote. So just for fun, where would you fall on this one, Chris? Are we still non-essential, or would you double up Craig's essential vote?
Well, I agree with Craig. I like the Kirk parts of the episode, but Charlie just really gets on my nerves. I have trouble watching the episode because of him. So for me, it has to go down in the non-essential column.
All right. So I guess we kind of put the nail in that coffin. And moving on, the third episode that we covered is actually the second pilot for Star Trek: The Original Series, Where No Man Has Gone Before. And because this was a pilot episode, it visually looked much different than the proper production episodes that aired. So we pontificated that when this episode aired third, it may have confused people. So before we continue talking about this, do you have a good plot synopsis for us, Craig?
Sure thing. An encounter at the limits of our galaxy begins to change Lieutenant Commander Gary Mitchell and threatens the future of the Enterprise and the human race itself.
Yeah. So this episode featured a couple of pretty heavyweight guest stars, Gary Lockwood, and you also had Sally Kellerman. You know, both moved on to star in some pretty major motion pictures down the road. Craig and I wound up splitting on this one. I voted essential, and Craig voted non-essential. I went essential on this because Gary Mitchell and Kirk, Captain Kirk, had a history together, and it was explored a bit in the episode. You got to see how close they were as friends, and they kind of went through a lot together. And I felt that added a lot to the episode. That you got to learn more about Kirk's past through this episode, and I thought that being able to see a pilot episode kind of shed some light on the series as a whole and where things are coming from. You got to see a different version of Spock. His makeup was different. His eyebrows were different. His mannerisms were different. We kind of goofed around that he was kind of the loud, amplified version of Spock because he was yelling a lot of things in the episode. It's really fun to watch. And I think that if you're looking for the essential meat of Star Trek, I think it's a great place to go to see, where things started, the genesis of things. So I think there's a lot there. Chris, what do you think?
I have to go with this as an essential episode as well. For pretty much the same reasons you stated. I think it's cool seeing the difference in Spock from when he first started till later in the season. It's definitely a bit more vocal and shows a bit more emotion. I think just overall, I think the story, it's pretty cool. Definitely a good introduction. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool from start to finish. Not the greatest episode in the world, I don't think. But it's a good intro to what's going to be happening later in the series.
Yeah, and you get to see the ill-fated phaser rifle, which never makes an appearance again. So, Craig Cohen, you disagreed and you voted non-essential on this. You want to give us a recap on why?
Yeah, it basically dovetails with a lot of the stuff that you guys were talking about in terms of the slight difference in look of certain things. It just, as a pilot, the series still had a few things that had to, sort of be changed before it would really look and feel like Star Trek. And while this is a very powerful episode and has a great theme, I just think that it's too far removed visually and sometimes tonally from the rest of the season that I think somebody sitting down to watch it might be put off a little bit. And in order to just avoid that confusion, I voted it as a non-essential episode.
I can't necessarily argue with a lot of your perspectives on that, because while I think it's great to get a knowledge of, what Star Trek was before it actually made it to air, it can also be kind of confusing, especially when seen in the original air date order and the episode shows up third. So you've seen the Man Trap, you've seen Charlie X, you're already getting used to what Star Trek looks like, and then all of a sudden you're kind of smacked in the face by this very bizarre looking cast of characters, and really the only characters that recur are Kirk and Spock, and the rest of the crew is completely different. So it can be a little bit jarring. So, as you didn't fight on Charlie X, I'm not going to really fight on this one, and we'll kind of just leave it lie where it is and move on to episode 4, which was The Naked Time. And in The Naked Time, the Enterprise crew is intoxicated by an inhibition-stripping contagion which causes mayhem throughout the ship. And this episode is popular for a lot of reasons. One, you get that bare-chested Mr. Sulu with the rapier and chasing people down a hallway. Great stuff. You get the emotional Mr. Spock, who's having trouble with keeping his emotions contained because of the virus. And I think Craig and I both went essential on this one. And Craig, what were your essential votes? You remember what you said?
I don't remember 100% what I said, but right now I'm going to say that it's really one word makes this essential. Sulu.
Wow, yeah. I definitely
This is that
agree.
cocktail party rule in effect.
Oh, it definitely is. And there are plenty of interviews out there with George Takei where he talks about his memories of this and how much he enjoyed doing it. So that is definitely a great reason for the Sulu stuff alone. I also mark this essential because of the character development moments for Spock, where you see his emotions kind of bleeding through a little bit because he can't contain them because of the virus. And you also get all of the characters are present in a very early episode, including Nurse Chapel. So you kind of get a feeling for Nurse Chapel, and you get the reveal that she has a thing for Spock. It's pretty neat to see that and get a little bit about her at the same time. So both of us are essential. It looks like we're pretty solid on that vote. So we'll turn it over to Mr. Ritzer here.
Oh, without a doubt, this is an essential episode. It's a ton of fun to watch. Of course, the Sulu moments, they're great. Spock, like you said, just a great episode, I think. A ton of fun to watch.
Yeah. So all three of us seem to be pretty solid on that one. So it doesn't seem like we need to talk about that a heck of a lot more. So episode 5, The Enemy Within, Mr. Craig Cohen.
A transporter malfunction splits Captain Kirk into two people, one good and one evil, and neither capable of functioning well separately.
And we both went essential on this one. So why don't you just give us a quick recap on why?
Yeah, for me, this was mainly another character-driven essential vote. I think you could also make a slight argument for a technology standpoint where you can say the transporter has its fair share of malfunctions over the course of the series.
Yes.
And this is possibly the first indicator of that. So if you were really looking for something beyond character moments, I might play that card. Mm-hmm. But I think there's enough Kirk stuff going on here where with Kirk being split into a good and an evil side, you really get to see two extremes of his personality. And for me, the moment where the good Kirk is sort of comforting the evil Kirk, for me, it really stands as a really, really powerful Captain Kirk moment, and one that I think every fan of the series should see.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Chris, what do you think?
I think we'll have to go essential on this one as well. I think William Shatner had a chance to really go off and take a bit of a right-hand turn with his acting. Got to do a bit more, be a villain a little bit in this episode. It's another fun episode to watch. Of course, the transporter malfunction, which pops up every once in a while each season. It's a cool episode.
And I'm amazed that neither one of you mentioned the pink dog with the horn. The essential completely for that reason. How you could take a dog, dye its hair, glue a horn on its head. Only Star Trek, right? But yeah, I agree with the both of you. The insight you get into Captain Kirk in this episode is great. And I thought, when you see the two halves of Kirk split apart, you really get a good sense into what he has to go through on a daily basis to balance his passions, because you see there's an extreme good side and there's an extreme savage side, and together they balance out into this great captain we all know and love, but apart they just break down. So really, really great stuff, and absolutely essential watching for anybody who wants to get the most out of watching Star Trek. The next episode was Mudd's Women, and I'll tell you personally, I took some flack for this one because I went non-essential on this, and Craig went essential. So this is a famous episode because it introduces Harry Mudd. So the official synopsis is the Enterprise rescues a con man named Harry Mudd who is trafficking in mail order brides. So he's intergalactic pimping, and he's got the hat to prove it. But I went non-essential on this because despite it being the introduction of Harry Mudd, I think as a character and as a potential villain character, the I Mudd episode, the second Harry Mudd appearance in season 2, is a far, far better use of Harry Mudd than Mudd's Women is. I felt that Mudd's Women was pretty weak overall. If you listen to the episode, I have a lot of things that happened during the episode that I pick apart, and I just couldn't bring myself to vote essential on this, knowing that I far, far prefer the I Mudd episode. And I know, Craig, you disagreed with that.
Yeah, for me, Mudd is just too fun of a character to avoid any of his appearances. So for me, the real weight of my vote went towards Mudd. I think on a sort of technology bent, even though they weren't referring to them as dilithium yet, the fact that we possibly learned for the first time that the Enterprise needed to run off of lithium crystals, I think is kind of a cool little piece of knowledge that, you know, you learn that the Enterprise isn't running off of nuclear power or something like that. You get a clear-cut definition or answer of how the Enterprise powers itself. And, you know, for me, again, like I said, this is really the weight of my argument is Mudd. But if I had to sort of, you know, factor in some other things, I'd bring up the need for the lithium, soon to be retermed dilithium crystals.
Interesting. Chris, what do you think?
Okay, I understand why this could be considered an essential episode by a lot of people, but for myself, I just do not like the Harry Mudd episodes, so I have to give it the non-essential vote. He just really gets on my nerves, and every season when he would pop up, and even into the animated series, I'm like, oh boy, here's the Harry Mudd episode. I just really struggle to get through him.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. And you know what? I'll even add to that, Chris. I'm going to co-sign on this, but not for the same reasons. I've been accused of being a staunch Gorn supporter. Why does the Gorn get one appearance and Harry Mudd keeps coming back? Come on, man. Come on. All right, that's enough. I'm not gonna belabor it any more than that. I'm not gonna beat it up anymore. I'm just gonna leave it at that. Gorn, 1, Mudd, what, 3?
4.
4.
Animated series.
Come on, man. Okay. Anyway, episode 7. What are little girls made of? What do you think, Craig?
Oh, this is an episode that I really can't get enough of. At the end of the day, if you're asking me to put up or shut up and say what my favorite Star Trek episodes are, this would be solidly in my top 3. Depending on the mood I'm in, it could rotate into any of those slots. It's also one of my favorite episodes that we did, not counting any of our supplemental episodes. I think the discussion that we had based on the content of this episode just really, really makes this a special episode for me.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to echo that comment. You know, just for the listeners out there, in case you're wondering what this episode was the Enterprise finds archaeologist Dr. Roger Corby, who has been missing for 5 years, living underground on a deserted planet with a group of sophisticated androids. And, you know, I've said this to some listeners that I talk to on a regular basis, and I think, and Craig obviously feels the same way. This, to me, was the episode of our show where we really kind of hit our stride. I think we finally got to a point where, we were really able to fully explore an episode and have some great tangential conversations about the philosophies and principles presented by that episode. And we both went essential, obviously. My reasons were pretty simple. There's a lot of Nurse Chapel backstory, and although she's a relatively minor character, you find out a lot of things about her. And, she shows up quite a bit in the series, and she still shows up, she shows up in the movies, and I think it's worth it for that. And that alone makes it quote-unquote essential, but there are some other great things about it. This is a very thought-provoking episode. It presents the concept of a human consciousness being transplanted into an android body and becoming immortal. That's a conversation that I think any of us could have, and you could go on for hours and hours and hours pontificating on what that would be like and the moral implications of that, and Craig and I go through a lot of that. And once again, this is probably the third time I've said this, because I know I said it on the original episode, and I also said it on our extended discussion of the City on the Edge of Forever with April Bear when we kind of touched on this. Sherry Jackson / Andrea is my favorite Star Trek babe of all time. Oh, Chris is applauding. Are you co-signing on that, Chris Ritzer? All right. What do you think, Craig? I don't think you ever really comment. I think Craig is too good of a guy to comment on stuff like that.
I will say that, I think we have the the three of us are in agreement there. I mean, there have been a lot of very attractive actresses on Star Trek over the years, but she definitely ranks very, very high in that department. And I just love the character so much. And really one of the main things beyond the Nurse Chapel stuff that's going on, it's what you mentioned, Jeff, is the theme of this episode and what makes us human. This is the perfect example of cocktail party discussion. So even if this episode isn't, a cocktail party episode, this is something that you could talk about with a group of people that you've just met and never run out of something to talk about. I think there's so many things that are that can spring from this episode that can stir discussions. And I know that even after we stopped recording our episode, the conversation has sort of extended itself, ever since. It's something I know I think about a lot. And I think when you're thinking about the theme of an episode that far after you've watched it, you can't call it anything but essential.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I want Chris and everyone listening to this episode right now to mark this moment, because I can feel it in my bones that Craig has mentioned this cocktail party criteria. He is gearing up to give me the fight of my life. In a very short amount of time, you're going to hear a knockdown drag out. And I think that's the one we're going to use to close this episode. So you got a little while to go, but mark my words, I think it's coming. I can feel it. But before we get there, we have to talk about Miri, which I think we already mentioned before as one of the episodes we kind of feel we can kind of toss out. Miri, we both did a non-essential on this one. And for those who may be unfamiliar or need a little bit of a memory jog, the Enterprise discovers an Earth-like planet that was devastated by a horrific degenerative disease and is now populated entirely by impossibly old children. Non-essential for me, definitely. No memorable villains, no particularly outstanding character development. I can even dismiss Janice Rand, my legs look terrible breakdown. And the only thing about this episode that I can say that I find a positive is that Kirk acts as kind of a father or big brother figure to Miri. So you do have some endearing Kirk moments as he's trying to comfort her through a very tough time in her life. So, that there is a little bit of redemption there, but not necessarily enough to deem it an essential episode. Do you agree with that estimation, Craig?
Yeah, and I think we get enough of that Kirk stuff even in other episodes this season. And for me, it's just one of those episodes that doesn't really keep me engaged, even though they have the sort of ticking clock, with all the old people eventually, developing the green rash. Even with the ticking clock, this wasn't an episode that I was on the edge of my seat for. And it might have been a combination of the fact that they were just on, a backlot set somewhere, that didn't look futuristic, and all those kids. And it's one of those rare turkeys, in my opinion, of Star Trek.
Oh, man.
Yes, I hate to pull punches, but...
Sometimes you got to do it, man.
Yeah.
So, Chris Ritzer, any thoughts on Miri?
Yeah, I think this is a pretty bad episode. I can't stand all the child actors in there. That's one problem I think Star Trek has sort of had through all its incarnations. They really find some bad child actors, and there's a lot of them in this one episode, and it's kind of mind-numbing. So it's just put off to the side, get to the next one.
Yep, all in agreement. Move along. Episode 9, Dagger of the Mind. Want to take us a walk through this one, Craig?
Sure thing. A routine visit to the Tantalus penal colony proves dangerous for Kirk and an Enterprise psychiatrist.
And we both went essential on this episode, so continue on with what your reasons were.
Yeah, you know what? There's not really anything jumping out at me as to why I voted this essential. I think it probably, I should have went back and checked my notes, but I think it has to do with the amount of mental fortitude that Kirk sort of showcases when he's going through his treatments. And this is an episode where, unlike Miri, I was on the edge of my seat by the time we got to the end of this episode.
Yeah, I'll echo those sentiments. So I have in my notes, I went with character development on the part of Kirk. So, you see some of his faults, which are, he kind of puts himself into a really bad scenario here of, he's messing around with this device, and he kind of puts himself in a scenario where he can quickly lose the upper hand in the situation and then have to fight his way back out of it. So you see a little bit of that in there. And I also really love the Dr. Van Gelder angle. The performance is great.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
very memorable. So aside from the Kirk character development, which is what I think, clicks it as essential, you also have some great side notes in there. And Van Gelder, in my opinion, is a great side note. It's a kind of a bonus for this episode.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
What about you, Chris?
I'm not quite sure it's essential, but it's definitely a good episode. I enjoy watching it, and it's not one you're going to skip. So, yeah, why not? I guess it's essential. It's good.
Oh, man. Okay. All right, we'll go with that. All right, next up, episode 10, the Corbomite Maneuver. And the Corbomite Maneuver is exploring a distant region of space. The Enterprise is threatened by Baylock, Ron Howard's creepy little brother, commander of a starship from the First Federation. Now, I kind of edited that description, but that was kind of one of the sentiments that I felt when I was watching this episode. Although, I did vote essential on this episode, mostly for the Kirk and Dr. McCoy character development moments. So there's a lot of great stuff that happens in this episode where you get to see Captain Kirk standing up and being very, very tough in the face of certain doom. He's being threatened by what is obviously a far more powerful alien force that could pretty much obliterate the Enterprise, in the blink of an eye. Also, another very cool essential portion of this particular episode is that you get to understand the relative size of the Enterprise, because you have Sulu, who is telling you, the audience, about the size of the alien ship, and then you get to see the Enterprise, juxtaposed visually to the other side of the ship. So you can see the Enterprise actually looks really tiny in comparison to this gigantic alien ship, but the alien ship is absolutely humongous. You get a relative feel for how big the actual Enterprise ship is. So what were your feelings on this one, Craig?
That's actually an excellent point you made. But for me, the minor detail here would be the alien version of Baylock. which a lot of people probably saw in the end credits of Star Trek years and years and years as it ran in syndication. And beyond that, it was sort of to pile on to what you said about Kirk standing up in the face of what could be certain doom. It's the fact that this really showcases that Kirk was not afraid to gamble with not only his life, but every crew member on the Enterprise and the Enterprise itself. And there are a couple times during this season where I've pointed out moments where you really say, this is a definitive captain moment. This shows what makes a captain. And I think the game of poker that Kirk plays this episode is a real showcase of being able to make those choices as captain that not all of us would be able to make.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent way to describe that. I totally agree with all of those points. What about you, Chris?
Well, it's definitely essential, especially I think when you watch in production order. At that point, it's the second episode in the series. So you get to see right away that Kirk has balls of steel. He's he's captain that's going to do what he has to do. You get the introduction then of McCoy at that point. It's a really cool episode, and yeah, I dig it.
Oh, very good. So, I'm wondering, how do you feel, Chris, about Ron Howard's creepy brother in this episode? He really kind of throws me off.
The first time I saw him, I was like, whoa, that kid is really creepy. I don't know what else I can really say other than that.
Yeah, I mean, you got this little weird-looking kid in there, and they overdubbed the voice. So he's kind of like mouthing words, and they don't kind of match up, and they got him dressed up in that weird little outfit. It kind of creeped me out. I mean, Craig, you didn't get that?
Not really. I mean, the only thing that really creeps me out or that bugs me is sort of the little headband that he wears.
Yeah.
The headband on the bald head it looks really, really weird.
Yeah,
but
man.
Beyond that, I sort of have a fondness for Ron Howard's, brother.
His
When
name
he
is actually Clint, by the way.
Clint,
I should mention Clint Howard, sorry.
When he pops up in movies, like I'm a big fan of the movie Rock and Roll High School, and he has a great part in that. And I think overall, I just have an affinity for Clint Howard. So seeing him on an episode of Star Trek, I can sort of look past a lot of the stuff that might creep you out. But if I had to do it, I would remove the headband.
That's a good point. Maybe put like a crown of leaves or something there instead, because they do that in later Star Trek episodes. They give guys like loincloths and little crowns of leaves. I don't see why we couldn't have done that. But all right. So back to the seriousness. Now episodes 11 and 12 are represent the only 2-part episode of the entire series. So that's the Menagerie Part 1 and 2. So let's, for a minute, let's talk about the Menagerie Part 1, because the descriptions of the 2 episodes are slightly different, although it's a small story arc. Craig, take us through the synopsis for the first Menagerie.
All right. Mr. Spock fakes a message from the Enterprise's former commander, Christopher Pike, steals the vessel, and sets it on a locked course for the forbidden planet Talos 4. So, unbeknownst to the original watching audience when these episodes were aired, these 2 episodes were a recut of the pilot that had not aired at that point. So, you were going to get treated to seeing Captain Pike, the former captain of the Enterprise, before Captain Kirk came on board. So, you have Spock served with him. So you're going to be seeing some footage of Captain Pike and Mr. Spock on an adventure together on a planet. And the actual pilot episode, The Cage, wouldn't actually air until much, much, much later. Way, way long. I think it was about 1986, Craig? Yeah, it was right around Next Generation, yeah.
Yeah, it was way, way. And I remember watching it, and we went over that in the episode. So, but what we did was we did our essential voting for this and the second episode. Both are double essential, so we're kind of treating them as one as far as the essential voting. So what I'll do is I'll run through the synopsis for part 2, and then we'll talk about what our essential votes were. So part 2 was while Spock faces court-martial for kidnapping Captain Pike and hijacking the Enterprise, he further explains his actions with mysterious footage about Pike's captivity by the Telosians. Obviously, this episode is very Spock-centric. So you've got Spock, faking messages. You've got Spock commandeering the Enterprise. You've got Spock testifying in a court-martial proceeding. It's a lot of Spock. And because of that, you get a ton of insight into the character of Spock. You get to see how far Spock will go to take care of Captain Pike. It winds up that he's doing all of this to take poor Captain Pike, who's now confined to a space wheelchair, and get him back to this Telosian planet where he can live this illusionary life where he's no longer constricted by the bonds of that wheelchair and can be, happy again and kind of free with a female counterpart that he kind of had a little bit of a feelings for back in the cage. So I put this in the essential column, both of these episodes, 11 and 12, more or less because of all of the insight you get into Spock and what he's willing to do to take care of his friends and fellow crew members and former crew members. Craig, do you agree or disagree with that?
No, I agree definitely. And going further and expanding on that, I would say that you also get an indication that Kirk has an incredible faith in Spock. And even if he doesn't always agree with Spock's actions, he knows that there's a logical reason for them. So even in the face of all this evidence and Spock even basically saying, I'm guilty, Kirk wants to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I think it really shows Kirk's belief in Spock. And then beyond that, you sort of got the Enterprise before Kirk. We've got Pike, who would especially become important in the J.J. Abrams reboot.
Yes.
So I think from an important character in Star Trek history overall, removed from the original series, I think that seeing the Enterprise before Kirk helps make this an essential one for me.
Wow. I'm really glad that you brought up Captain Pike Revisited in the reboots because that had escaped me up until this point. And I think that actually adds a really great essential checkmark to these episodes because one of the things that I really did like about the rebooted Star Trek movies is how they treated the Captain Pike character. I think they did a great job with that. I mean, despite the flaws in the movies, I think what they did with Pike was great. They turned him into a great captain. They turned him into a great mentor for Kirk. And he was a character that was largely forgotten. You saw bits and pieces of him in the menagerie, and if you had watched The Cage and seen the pilot, you knew a little bit more about Captain Pike. But as far as the Star Trek universe was concerned, he didn't get a lot of play. And the fact that they gave him such a prominent role in the rebooted Star Trek movies, I thought was really, really great. Chris, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm a little torn on the essential nature of the episode, but if you look at it as tying it into the reboot, it's definitely essential. It gives you a lot of backstory on Pike. I really think it depends on if you watch The Cage or not, if it's essential. If you watch The Cage, I don't necessarily think you have to watch it, and I think taking one episode, splitting it into two, and I think an episode initially that I'm not really sure was a very good episode. It's kind of tough for me to sit through both of those episodes. However, a lot of important things happen in it. It gives you a lot of history on Spock, the Enterprise before Kirk. So, yeah, it is an essential episode, though it's not. It's probably my least favorite of the essential episodes.
Wow. That's some food for thought. So, what do you now, Craig? What do you think about that premise? So, the Menagerie 1 and 2 versus watching The Cage, as far as being essential for watching the reboots. What do you think is better, watching The Cage or watching Menagerie 1 and 2?
I think it's probably really, if I really had to think about it, I would say probably The Cage. Because The Cage leaves Pike in prime physical condition at the end of the episode.
That is true. That is true. I'm going to disagree, and if I had to make a choice, I would go for the Menagerie 1 and 2, simply because you get enough of the cage out of those two, plus you get the Kirk, Spock, and some of the other character growth moments, and you get to see Captain Pike living happily ever after at the end, which is kind of nice. So we'll kind of let that lie as it is and move on to episode 13, The Conscience of the King. What kind of a plot synopsis do you have for us, Craig?
All right, an actor traveling aboard the Enterprise may be a former governor who ordered a mass murder 20 years ago.
That would be Mr. Anton Caridian, would it not?
Yes.
Yes, of the Caridian Players. And Craig and I both voted essential on this episode. Craig, what are your essential reasons?
As unimportant as it may seem in the overall grand scheme of things when you look at Star Trek, the fact that Kirk had some kind of life-altering experience in his teens or early 20s, I think is important because it helps shape who he became. They never really explain how Kirk ended up on this planet. I think they kind of shoehorned him in, but even so, it is part of his history. And I think if you're really looking at putting together who Kirk is, this is a defining moment. And I think beyond that, there's not really much more I really think plays into making this essential aside from that.
Yeah, I agree. And, this may not be one of the best Star Trek episodes, but the amount of Kirk backstory that you get some insight into his past as a midshipman, and he's caught in the midst of a genocide, of a genocidal revolution at the hands of Kodos the Executioner, and you get to see Kirk kind of having to amazingly keeping his control of himself when he's faced with the potential that this could very well be Kodos the Executioner. He doesn't lose his cool, and almost gets frustrating to the viewer because, we obviously know that this is the guy, but Kirk keeps kind of wanting to deny it. And, I gotta be sure. You get to see a different side of Kirk. Whereas, in the past, with the salt monster, kill it. But he was so quick to gun that thing down. But this time he has to be so sure and so precise. There's so much depth to Kirk in this one, and you also see he's capable of a little bit of deception, where he kind of uses Lenore, the daughter of Anton Caridian, to kind of entrap Kodos on the ship so that he has time to investigate this whole thing. And aside from that, there are some really awesome Spock and McCoy dialogue exchanges as they debate the actions of Kodos and the actions of Kirk back and forth. There's a great yin and yang there between the two of them. And they're great illustrations of what are going to be the hallmark or the trademark of these two characters up against each other. The logical versus the passionately emotional. So great stuff there. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I completely forgot about the McCoy-Spock interactions before you mentioned them. Yeah, that definitely goes a long way, I think, to make this a essential episode. Kirk, he's definitely grown a lot since just wanting to blast the salt creature. Plus, you have Kodos, his daughter. She's a real total Fruit Loop in this thing too.
Yeah, man.
She's fun to watch, and get a laugh out of her. It's a cool episode. Yeah, 2 thumbs up for this one.
Wow. I'm surprised. This is a very interesting insights here from Chris. What do you think about that, Craig? He's been kind of agreeing where we didn't think he would, and disagreeing where we didn't think he would.
Yeah, it's kind of cool to see the times that we all seem to have our finger on the same pulse.
Yeah, definitely. So we're creeping towards the imminent battle to come. Now, we've got one more episode to cover before I wind up in pieces. And that episode is number 14, The Balance of Terror. And this episode, I think, Chris is going to have some fantastic insight into. Let's give the audience a little bit of a memory jog. This episode introduces the Romulans. So the Enterprise battles a Romulan ship suspected of destroying outposts near the neutral zone. Now, Craig and I both went essential on this, and there are a heck of a lot of reasons why. First up is, of course, the introduction of the Romulans themselves. So you've got a major player in the Star Trek universe making their first appearance here, and it's a really great appearance. Some starship battles. You're seeing a Romulan commander, seemingly one of the best ones they have, fighting one-on-one, mano-a-mano, essentially, with the Enterprise. So you've got these two great combat captains, space combat captains, trying to one-up each other throughout this whole episode. One gets the upper hand, then loses it to the other one, and vice versa. It keeps kind of going around. And you get to see what Kirk is really like in a ship-on-ship space combat. And it also introduces the concept of the neutral zone, which this is the first time we hear about it, and it's going to come into play constantly throughout many, 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 many more episodes and series of Star Trek. And the movies, nonetheless. So a lot of great stuff about this episode. Chris Ritzer, I know you have a lot of insight into the Romulans. You want to kind of take us through some of your insights?
Okay, this is a really cool episode, of course, because you said it's the introduction of the Romulans. You get to see Kirk is with his military acumen. He knows what he's doing. He's a great tactician. But get back to the Romulans. It's definitely a cool introduction to them. It's also, I believe, it's the first time many Federation people have seen the Romulans, and probably, supposedly at this point, about 100 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a total shock when they look just like Vulcans. Also, it's just so happens that the Romulan is Spock's dad, resurrected or something.
Yeah, so, it turns out that the actor who plays the Romulan captain winds up coming back and playing Spock's father later on. Sarek. Yeah. So, I always wondered what it was like to watch that and see him come back as Spock's father. I wonder how many people picked up on that back then. Guess we'll never know the answer to that. So, Chris, continue. I'm sorry.
But yeah, otherwise, it's just a great introduction to the Romulans as they keep coming back and pretty much end up being the major antagonist to the Federation throughout all the Star Trek series, even more so than the Klingons. They have cool ships.
The bird of prey.
Yes. Yeah, to this point, it's probably my favorite episode in the first season when this episode aired.
Wow, yeah. So another thing I really liked about this episode was this Romulan super weapon. So you have this introduction of this immensely powerful weapon that the Romulans wield, and not until Kirk figures out that it has a limited range do they figure out the weakness of it. So really cool that Kirk is able to overcome, a weapon that destroyed so many outposts and seemingly had no counter. So, Craig, you went essential on this too. Are your reasons similar?
Yeah. You can't discount the importance of the Romulans or the neutral zone. And I think you both touched on what's really an important aspect of this for me, which is you get to see captains on either side captaining.
Yep.
And you also ultimately see the mutual respect that exists. And I think there's even that line from the Romulan towards the end of the episode where he goes, "I'd like to think that in different circumstances we would have been friends."
Yeah, that's great.
And again, it really showcases that it takes a certain kind of person to captain a space vessel.
Definitely.
And regardless of your side, Romulan, Klingon, well, Klingon maybe not. I think they're a little too emotional sometimes. But, I think it really sort of shows what level these guys operate on and how not anybody could sit in that captain's chair.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Very well said. I can't add a heck of a lot more to that. So, as much as I would love to drag my feet right now, I've been putting this off for months, And we have to bring ourselves to talk about Shore Leave once again. Episode 15. And if I have taken kidney punches for any episode, more it's this one. So famously, Craig went essential on this, and I went non-essential on this. So, Craig, give me another 30 seconds stay of execution while you read the synopsis.
All right, I actually have a write-up from the TV Guide close-up section the week this episode aired. In deep space, the USS Enterprise makes a rest and recreation stop that proves anything but restful. Captain Kirk has selected an apparently ideal site for his crew's much-needed furloughs, yet there is something wrong. The advanced party cites storybook characters, living persons from their own pasts, and a host of other strange objects. Even the superlogical Mr. Spock is mystified.
Well, give me another stay of execution and tell us why you think it's essential.
I do want to point out that until this episode wraps, you still have time to change your vote, sir.
Go on.
But I will say, for me, this is what the cocktail party rule was created for. I think this is just too iconic of an episode. This is on the same level as The Trouble with Tribbles or The City on the Edge of Forever or Mirror Mirror in terms of people knowing it. As much as we may not want to like it, people remember the guy in the rabbit suit. And at the same time, I think there's some cool Kirk history stuff that is brought to the surface here, where we have a glimpse at Kirk's sort of Starfleet experience and some slight bullying that he went through with a character named Finnegan. And we also get a look at one of Kirk's earlier loves. So I think you roll all that together with a heavy, heavy, heavy dose of the cocktail party rule. And this episode is really nothing but essential, in my opinion.
Well, see, that's where I have a problem, since I don't really subscribe to the cocktail party rules. So that is the one rule on which we differ in our essential criteria, and I think that's the nail that's driven between the two of us on this one. So I have a hard time rolling over on this one, because I don't necessarily think that Finnegan is enough to really. I mean, we've gotten some great Kirk backstory in the past with Gary Mitchell and with Kodos. I mean, you got some really heavyweight Kirk backstory moments. So, a guy that he had some scuffles with, I really don't know if that's necessarily enough. There's no real quote unquote memorable villains. I mean, I guess the planet is the villain in this one. So, it's tough to say, that we can have a memorable villain here, even though the Shore Leave planet does get used again in the animated series. Still, I don't know if that's enough to really push me over the edge. And you do get the reconnection with this Ruth character, which is another one of Kirk's many flings from the past. She's made of plant materials this time around. So Kirk's making out with the plant, but that's okay. And, I've been thinking about this and racking my brain about this, and I've had conversations with people outside of the show who listen to it, one of which really advocates for this episode quite strongly. And, thinking about it, the only thing about this episode that could even inch me anywhere closer to changing my mind is if you really played up the McCoy dying angle. Maybe the death and a quote almost immediate resurrection of a major character could be something worth seeing. But I mean, the turnaround time is pretty quick. I mean, he's only gone for a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes or so, 5.5, 10, somewhere around there minutes of the show. So I don't know. I can't bring myself to change my vote on this one. And, maybe let's hear from Chris and see if he has anything that can sway me.
Well, I think the Kirk Finnegan fight, that's somewhat humorous. Overall, it's a fun episode, but I have to agree with you. I do not think this is an essential episode.
Oh, wow.
I think it's easily skippable. And to me, it's not on that level of, say, Space Seed or the Tribbles.
Wow.
So I have to nay vote for me.
Wow, that was a real swift kick in the nards there, Craig. Totally skippable, huh? What do you think?
I did not. If I, on occasion I'm a betting man. I would have bet that Chris was going to fall on my side here.
Wow. Well, and I have another one more shot in my hip belt here. So I have some commentary from our friend Mr. Jeff Ferry on this episode as well. Let's hear what he has to say on this.
Shore Leave is the problem is it's two different arguments for me. If you just argued with me, is it a good episode? I would say it's a good episode. Like, I enjoy it. But, like, if you argued is an essential episode, I would say it's not an essential episode. That's the difference. Like, if you were making a list of for good episodes, it's good. I would side with Craig on that. It's a good episode. I like it. I think it's good. But, like, is it essential? If you remove that from season 1, does it make season 1 less overall? It doesn't. I still think it's good. I don't think you miss it if you cut it out. It's not like if you cut Arena from the first season, like, you're missing something. If you cut Space Seed, you're missing something. If you cut Shore Leave, you're not missing anything. I mean, there's some fun stuff in there with McCoy and Kirk, stuff that you enjoy, but I think you enjoy it more if you're a huge fan of the series. That's why you like those things that are going on in there. But I know I would have come down on your side. I would have said it wasn't essential.
Aha! Another one on my side. So that's three of us who are kind of non-essential on this one, and I think that still solidifies my non-essential vote on this. And my emotional side, I really want to kind of help you guys out. You, Craig, and our listener Steve. I feel bad for disagreeing with you guys so hard on this, and I know you both have impassioned pleas. And maybe even some good reasons why you think this episode is essential, but my rule set that I have set out for myself, I just can't wedge this one in there. So I don't think that I can change my vote on this episode.
Jeff, I just want you to know that you're responsible for the future listener who finds themselves at a cocktail party talking Star Trek and does not know this episode because we deemed it non-essential.
Well, I don't know how many Star Trek fans wind up at cocktail parties, and if they do, are they social enough to have conversations? Will they find other people at those parties who talk Star Trek? I don't know. If they do, if anyone finds themselves in that bizarre scenario, feel free to blame me. It's okay. I can take it. I can take it. I'll be able to sleep at night.
Well, the good thing is, unless you find a way into my house, you'll never be able to take this episode out of my Blu-ray collection.
That's, you know what? And we're entitled to our opinions. And anybody else out there who's listening to this, I know we have a couple of you guys out there who talk to us on Facebook and on Twitter. Please feel free. I'm pretty bulletproof. If you disagree with me, let me have it. I'm totally fine with it. And it probably would make Craig feel better and make our friend Steve feel better that there are people out there who are willing to throw a few punches my way for shooting this episode down.
Yeah, it's funny because until we actually sat down and watched the episode and went to our essential voting, this was one of those things where by default I just assumed you were going to go essential on, and that's what really sort of makes it all the more gut-wrenching, if you will.
Yeah, I can understand that. But you know what? I think this is one of the great things about what we're doing with the show. I think this has been a great exercise for the two of us, and we're both very, very hardcore original series fans, and I think sitting down and watching these shows and just discussing them and figuring out what we think are the most essential episodes, and when we disagree, it actually makes it kind of fun, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, and I think that's really one of the beauties of all of the Star Trek series, not even the original series, but is the fact that there are things you can take away from every episode that can extend your conversation. Mm-hmm. You can watch an episode with somebody and then go get a bite to eat, and you can spend the entire meal discussing the episode that you just watched and agreeing or disagreeing on on what certain characters did or the outcome or the overall themes. And not a lot of shows can do that, or not a lot of shows in prime time slots, can do that.
Yeah, I agree. And, one saving grace about Shore Leave is that while we can't agree on the essential nature, we can say, and we already have said, that it's not one of the quote-unquote bad episodes of the first season, right?
Yeah.
I like it. So I'm not going to say I don't like it. So I think we already said that at Miri and the Alternative Factor were pretty much the toss-outs. And all the other ones are good.
Yeah.
So, even though I don't think it's essential, I definitely don't think it's bad.
Yeah, I think it's certainly a fun episode to watch.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's some fun stuff in there. Sulu firing off the gun.
Yeah.
You see that big old cheese grin on his face. You see that Don Juan nonsense. I mean, I riffed on that Don Juan stuff in the episode quite a bit, I remember. And, we had a heck of a lot of fun talking about it. And, the Sulu being chased by the samurai warrior. I mean, come on, man. Where are you going to see that again? Great stuff. I mean, it's a lot of fun to watch. It's a lot of fun to watch. So I think, this is pretty much the midpoint. And I think this is a great stopping point for the first part of our season 1 wrap up. And this will be airing, and the following week after that, we'll be getting our part 2, in which we'll cover the second half of the first season, starting with episode 16, the Galileo 7. And I believe Chris Ritzer will be back with us for that.
Yes, I would be honored.
Awesome. So we are going to have Chris here in studio with us again, and we'll have more comments from Mr. Jeff Ferry. And we're going to see if we can get a couple of our other past guests to send in some comments as well, and maybe some of you listeners out there. So any of you guys that hit us up on Facebook and Twitter, if you want to submit stuff for the second half, starting with Galileo 7 all the way through Operation Annihilate, if you have some things you want to share, feel free to throw them at us, and we can include them in the episode. So in closing, any closing comments from either of you guys? Craig?
No, this was a lot of fun. I knew that the sort of wrap-up episode was going to be one that I really look forward to, because it really gives us a chance to recalibrate, if you will. Look back at what we've watched before we start on our season 2 journey. And it's always a lot of fun and a pleasure to sit down and talk with Chris, because he brings an incredible perspective and an incredible amount of Star Trek knowledge to the discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chris, thank you so much for taking time out. I mean, Chris lives a little bit of a distance away from us, so for him to come here and be with us, it's a little bit of a hardship on him, but we really appreciate you being here, Chris. We enjoy having you, and I know I've gotten some feedback from our guests before that said they really enjoyed your contribution, so thanks again for being a part of this show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
No problem. We really enjoy it, and thanks everybody out there for listening. Once again, Facebook.com/the Tricorder Transmissions, Twitter.com at TTT_pod, or our own website at the tricordertransmissions.com. All 3 ways you can get in touch with us to submit your own comments for the second half of this episode or any future episodes. So great, once again, talking to you guys, and we'll pick this conversation up again 1 week from now.